look at these two folks and let's see their lives and let's see how each one of them gives a much different picture of what kind of a legacy can be left. First, let's look at the lady, the worshiper. She tries to do a good work for Christ and is attacked for doing that good work. Here is the situation. She has a flask of ointment that was incredibly expensive. In fact, the ointment, if you were to put it in dollars, or if you were to put it in the money at the time, it was 300 denarii worth of ointment. 300 denarii would have been equivalent to a year's pay. Now imagine spending a whole year's pay, number one, on the ointment, and then secondly, to take this flask, this alabaster jar that it comes in, breaking it open and using it simply to pour on someone's head. She poured it across Christ's head, and John's Gospel says that she also poured it on Jesus' feet. So that she poured it on his head and poured it on his feet, and then she took her hair from her head, and back then they would have these long flowing hair that they would keep up, and they would bring it down, and she brought it down and she wiped his feet with her hair. This would have been a most powerful example of worship. Here is my very best. This is the most costly thing in my whole house, is this container of ointment. And instead of holding it back from God, instead of holding it back from the Lord, instead of being selfish with it, I'm going to use it to worship my Lord. Picture of worship that is beautiful. In fact, Jesus said, this is a beautiful thing that she has done. But not everybody felt that way. In fact, almost as soon as she broke the flask of ointment, as soon as she began to pour it on the head of Jesus, what happened? The disciples began to attack her for it. They began to say, why this waste? You ever notice people are only concerned about waste when it's wasted on someone else? People are never concerned about waste when stuff's wasted on them. When someone does something lavish for me, it's fine. But when they do something lavish for somebody else, that's a waste. That was just a waste. Look at what she did. A year's salary down the drain. John's Gospel tells us that this woman was actually attacked first by Judas Iscariot. In fact, if you have your Bibles and you want to open them very quickly, let's just open to John's Gospel. John chapter 12. John chapter 12 and verse 4. It says, but Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was about to betray him, said, why was this an ointment not sold for 300 denarii, that's how we know how much it was worth, and given to the poor? He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of a money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. You see the point? Judas wanted the money for himself. So Judas says what? He says, why this waste? And you can imagine how one person starts something and they get everybody on their side. Judas started it, but if you go back to the passage in Matthew, it says the disciples said, why this waste? The disciples made the point, but it was started by Judas. Boy, I tell you, and I know this to be a fact, it only takes one person to start a problem. Because one person will get 2 people, will get 3 people, will get 5 people, will get 10 people, and then the whole church is in uproar because one person had a problem. And this is what has happened here. Judas has had one. Oh yeah, by the way, this is just a little off subject, but this is kind of, I heard this and I thought it was great. Somebody said, you want to know how to stop gossip? You want to know how to stop gossip? Don't ever agree with someone when they say something ugly about somebody else. give you an example. Boy, wasn't her dress ugly today? Sorry. And you say, wasn't her dress ugly today? You have a choice at that moment. You can say, yeah, it was, and her shoes didn't match. Or you can say, actually, I thought it looked good. That will stop it right there. You know that? They will change the subject if you don't agree with it. Because they'll be a little embarrassed. If they say, boy, her dress was ugly, and you say, actually, I thought it was pretty. Okay, let's talk about something else. That's what could have happened with Judas. If Judas said, look at this ointment, it's a waste. And the other apostles said, wait a minute now. She's doing it for Jesus. Wait a minute now. What she's doing is a great and beautiful thing. But what did they do? Instead, they took the easy way, because it's always easier to agree than to contradict someone, isn't it? It's always easier to say, well, yeah, it really is a waste. Jesus, why are you letting her do this? Because now they're in the majority. What they didn't realize is Jesus is always the majority. Jesus is always going to win. He doesn't take a vote. He doesn't care. He's going to say what he wants to say anyway. So when they all decided to kind of gang up, Judas makes the statement, all the guys agree, and Jesus says, wait a minute, fellas, you're wrong. What she has done is a beautiful thing. What she has done is a righteous thing. In fact, she, without even knowing it, is preparing me for burial. She's getting me ready. I'm about to go to the cross. You don't know that. You haven't figured that part out yet. You haven't figured out that we're not on a mission to conquer Rome. I'm on a mission to conquer sin. I'm about to go to the cross. She doesn't know it either, but she's at least worshiping me, and she's doing what God has led her to do, which is pour oil on my head and my feet, which is preparing me symbolically for the death and burial that I'm about to undergo. She's worshiping me. Get it through your numbskulls. She's doing right. You know what it was? She was doing something that those guys considered to be radical. And nobody likes a radical. Nobody likes a radical. Nobody likes something. In fact, if you try to live for Christ in the world, and you really try to live for Christ, that means you're going to do things that are radically different than other people. You're going to put your tithe first for God. That's radical to most folks. Most folks give God their last. You give God your first. That's radical. You're going to set aside days to worship God in your life. That's radical. Because most folks go to church when they want to, and if they don't want to, they just don't go. They don't consider being among God's people a responsibility of God's people. If you're radical, you're going to do things like avoid certain types of pleasures that other people enjoy. A lot of folks love to go and watch any type of movie out there. Now, I like to go to the movies. But let me tell you something, folks. We have to be able to take a stand and say there are some things that I am not going to allow the windows to my soul to accept. There are some things that I am not going to let pass through my auditory glands right here in my ears. I'm not going to let that sound. I don't want to hear ugly talk. I don't want to see people half naked. And I don't want to see people acting a fool. So I'm going to avoid those things. And you know what? You do that and you're radical, man, because everybody likes to see people half naked and say bad words. I'm lying. Am I lying? Well, not everybody, but you understand what I'm saying is the vast majority of people out there, they eat it up. Why is